So I'm super excited to be joined today by two very exciting panelists. Michelle Lee is CEO of Obsidian Strategies, a consulting firm that helps companies and boards realize their AI opportunities while minimizing their risks. She's also an experienced board director, currently serving on the boards of MassMutual, Unity Technologies, MIT, and Callisto Media. Recently, Michelle was a senior executive and vice president of AI at Amazon and the Undersecretary of Commerce under President Obama. She's an MIT AI-trained computer scientist and helpful to today's discussion, brings perspectives from the top levels of technology, law, business, and government. Richard Entrup has led global technology operations, digital transformation, and innovation programs in many prominent global brands, including Verizon, Christie's, Disney, ABC's Time Warner, the Museum of Modern Art, Viacom, and Tiffany & Company. Richard is currently the senior advisor to KPMG US, focused on generative AI, Web3, and metaverse strategy in the Enterprise Innovation Group. Richard's also a strategic advisor to various early stage startups focused on Web3, blockchain, metaverse, online art and NFT platforms, generative AI, visual search, and quantum resistant cybersecurity. So thank you both for joining us today. So why don't we jump into it? So Richard, we'll start with you. Why has Gen I served as an inflection point for AI, which has been around for many decades, as we know? Why all the buzz? And importantly, what are some of the use cases for Gen I by sector?
Thanks, Sam. Great to be here. Good to see everyone. I think the inflection point or tipping point for generative AI. AI, as many of you know, has been around for decades. It's not new. And many organizations and many sectors have been leveraging the technology for various use cases like predictive analytics and sales. I came from media, so Disney used lots of AI systems for various business purposes, heavily around ad sales and how to place programmatic ads in the digital landscape. But I think the inflection point was late last year. These apps came out, things called Lensa. Some of you may have seen, that allowed you to upload your picture and photos and AI yourself. And then ChatGPT, OpenAI had released ChatGPT. And what changed is, I think, it consumerized, right? We now had access to a very simple Google box where you can type in prompts. And from those prompts, you can create copy, marketing copy or text. You could create images, photographs, or paintings, or what have you. Anything you could visualize in text could be manifested as an image, or a piece of even music has been impacted by this. So I think that was it, right? The tools became readily available and consumerized. Previously, a lot of the AI systems and large GPU farms needed to run this AI had been only available to data scientists and certain large corporations who had access to the technology. I think that's what happened, and that's what changed. And now you can't scroll through a social media platform or every TikTok video seems to be a Gen AI post. So it's very interesting how this has become culture. And that, I think, is what changed over the last 6 months. It's changing at an unprecedented rate. I have never seen a hype cycle with this trajectory from a VC investment perspective, but also from a consumer awareness perspective. It is unprecedented by any standard, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't seem to go a day these days without another article coming out on the topic. Michelle, what about you? Anything to add here?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on the NACD program. And I do agree with Richard. The generative AI chatbots basically provided access. But what I will also say, the positive development, and you could put aside the hype, is that all of our boardrooms now, all of our CEOs are now seeing at a very visceral level firsthand the power of AI and its ability to transform our businesses and our society. Now, this power did exist to some degree, to a large degree, even before the November launch of ChatGPT. Companies had the opportunity to predict customer demand using machine learning, which is nothing more than using a mathematical model to that is developed trained on large volumes of data to make predictions about customer demand, to enhance inventory and supply chain management, to provide personalized recommendation on products like Amazon. They know what I want to buy even before I know what I want to buy. So if nothing else, this has put front and center AI as a critical piece of business strategy in all of my discussions in all of my boardrooms. I mean, since the November launch, it has been on the agenda, and I think it's rightly so because the technology is now ripe, and generative AI, um, hit us all. And I would say at this point, for the most part, I would call it a competent generalist but a poor specialist, because it doesn't do so well in solving problems that are outside the data distribution upon which it was trained. But a significant part of data, which makes these AI machine learning models powerful, is the proprietary data within the companies that you serve on the boards on. And I think what you'll see is in the future, in the present and the not too distant future, you're going to be seeing these generative base models being trained on your company's super proprietary, super valuable data to fine tune the general models so that the applications can be more powerful for your companies and for your industries. And that's a trend we'll be seeing. For example, Bloomberg is already working on Bloomberg GPT to create a purpose-built model for the financial use cases that are relevant to their industry. So I look forward to those developments, and I think as board members, those are the kinds of developments we should be encouraging and we will be overseeing.
Yeah, so yeah, very exciting. Um, so in terms of opportunities, we've discussed some of those now. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about some of the risks that board members should be aware of. Michelle, perhaps we'll start with you. What should boards be aware of in terms of risks, and any advice in terms of how to oversee risks from a board perspective?
Yeah, no, let me just start by saying I'm a technology optimist. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I do, which is to advise companies on digital transformation and AI in particular. So I believe there's a lot that can be achieved with increased productivity and improvement to our lives. But I'm also a pragmatist too, and I recognize the huge dangers, both corporate and societal, that lay ahead. And as a lawyer and a former governmental official, I see the risks presented and the potential regulatory obstacles. So again, as a board member, our job in the boardroom is to oversee the company's efforts in taking advantage of these tremendous opportunities and weighing that against the risks to minimize the risk. So let me just share with you some of the risks that came to my mind as I look at this technology. One is, of course, the accuracy issue. Many of these general AI systems are not enterprise ready due to lack of consistent accuracy. So when you're in the boardroom, ask the question, is there appropriate human review, especially if the application is critical? For example, medical diagnosis, healthcare, education, or financial resources. A little bit less so if the application is making movie recommendations, for example. So number one is the accuracy. Number two is the uncharted territory in terms of legal risks. So who is liable if something goes wrong based upon the output of a generative AI system? Is it the provider of the system? Is it the person who entered the prompt that generated the AI solution? Could it be perhaps the owners of the underlying content upon which the generative AI system was trained? And what if there are lots of underlying sources? How do you trace that liability? And of course, as the former head of the US Patent and Trademark Office and advisor to the president on intellectual property issues, I couldn't help but ask myself when I first saw this come out, what about the IP infringement issues, the intellectual property infringement issues? Keep in mind that these large language models that are the basis of ChatGPT and other such systems were trained on 45 terabytes of data from multiple sources, including Wikipedia, books, and basically the entirety of the internet. And I'm pretty sure that the creators of these large language models did not enter into license agreements for the rights to use the content from these copyright, patent, and trademark holders. So there's going to be a very messy intellectual property infringement issues that will need to be sorted out. And we're already seeing some of that in terms of litigation involving Getty Images and Stability AI, which alleged infringement of copyright by misuse of millions of Getty photos to train an AI art generation tool. And separate from whether or not the creators of these Gen AI systems had the rights, the underlying rights to train their models, is the issue of who will own the resulting intellectual property. So if I create an image using DALL-E, do I, the person who entered the prompt and triggered the response, own the resulting work? And is that resulting work even eligible for intellectual property protection? If so, how much and to what degree? And what I will say is that the Copyright Office says that it will not register works produced by a machine or a non-human. And the Patent Office currently says that a computer-generated invention is not eligible for patent protection. I will note that both these offices are seeking input from the public on this precise issue and what should the appropriate protections be in this space. So the bottom line is, if your resulting work is of value to your company, and I imagine it would be, your companies are going to have to think very hard about whether and when to use generative AI. And I know of at least one company that prohibits its programmers from using generative AI to write code. Another issue, of course, is disclosure of confidential information. OpenAI's terms of service say that the content that you enter into the system is yours, but they can use that information for training. And as a board member, I would be asking, are we adhering to our confidentiality obligations to our employees and our customers when we allow employees, or should we allow our employees to enter that information into a generative AI prompt? And I will say Samsung entered into a little issue here when an employee used ChatGPT to convert meeting notes into presentation contents. And there was a lot of proprietary confidential information in there. And so Samsung sent out an email to the employees warning them of the potential dangers of leaking this kind of information and saying that the data was impossible to retrieve as it's now stored in the servers belonging to OpenAI. But you can ask yourself, is this really that different from, for example, allowing your data to be in the cloud? But I think it is different because these generative AI systems are using your data to enhance their models. But I understand also that OpenAI may allow you to opt out of that and may also provide a special walled off area where you can use their service without having your data being used to enhance their models. So these are all new issues that will be navigated, but issues that as board members, we need to think about, not to mention bias in the system due to biases in the underlying data. But those are just a few.
Yeah, wow. So if you haven't got people's attention by now, I don't know what will, Michelle. It's definitely a lot to get your head around. And for the audience, we will be sharing resources to sort of summarize a lot of these topics after the program. And to remind everyone, please do drop any questions you have in the chat. We'll welcome those and save time for those at the end. So Richard, how about you? Any thoughts on the risks from a board perspective? What should we be thinking about?
So Michelle touched on many great points. We're all hearing this term guardrails right now around this technology for sure. Look, I came out of the art world, so I was very intimate with copyright infringement as it relates to images. But I think this extends beyond just imagery, it extends to the videos being created, the music being created, the copy and text being created. Generative AI is generating all kinds of media, video, stills, copy, context, and source code is a big issue. All of this has been created and learned based on existing content that has been created by someone else. Michelle is an expert on US copyright rules. The fact, as she stated, is that you cannot copyright computer generated imagery. However, these are styles. I happen to be deep down this rabbit hole of Midjourney and DALL-E 2 at being an art geek, and I've been creating things for well over 2 years now in these tools, and I run them through the Google imagery search, and I've never gotten a direct hit because I don't use the artist's names when I'm creating content. So I think and I've spoken to both Sam and Emad at OpenAI and at Stability on this subject. And the common response was, you can't copyright style, right? I can create a Picasso type painting on my own, and I can even sell it. If it looks exactly like an existing Picasso verbatim, I've got a problem. If it's a Picasso style, that's for debate, I guess, but that's one area. Getting other points Michelle raised, which I think are spot on. This still falls under, from a board perspective, the boards are tasked with governing ethical considerations, data privacy rules, legal and regulatory, all of that same stuff still rules here. I think to a certain extent around protecting, corporate information and not setting up for the indemnifications are the same. Cybersecurity risks. There are some nuances that relate to AI but it's still about data ultimately at the end of the day. And Michelle opened up her last answer with, she's an optimist, so am I. I'm a technologist, and I like to look for how we can leverage this technology for good, whether it's revenue opportunities, or I have friends in the healthcare space doing all kinds of things with AI and machine learning and the metaverse for mental health and neurodiversity. There's lots of great things that could be impacted by this technology, but like everything else, it's a double-edged sword. So I think boards need to be well aware of the existing risks around data protection, but also the nuances that AI bring into this. And that is, the fact is, as Michelle laid out, these models like OpenAI, for instance, went out, or Stability, they went out and scraped the entire internet in its entirety. Every image, every word, every Reddit post, every tweet has been scraped and collected and compressed so that you can query it through your prompt. That's never been accessible before to consumers, let alone, corporate folks, everyone within your organization. So you need to set some guardrails, and your existing data privacy rules should prevail and help get a handle on this so you can leverage it. Last but not least, Michelle mentioned the OpenAI data model is the entire internet. The company strategies, what's happening is organizations are building their own models. They're building their own guarded LLM models and frameworks so they can query their own data and gain some competitive advantage as a result of this. And I think that's the strategy where most organizations are heading towards. That is, building your own data models and then kind of APIing out to the public one as needed.
Yeah, Sam, if I could just follow up
Yeah.
briefly on Richard's a couple points that Richard's made. It's interesting on the copyright protection and who gets rights and so forth. If you think about it, artists and writers have always gotten inspiration by looking at other people's, other artists, other writers' works. And that's okay, right? But now we've got a computer system that systematically goes out and looks at absolutely everything, right? And then the question is, to what degree is it inspiration? To what degree is it copying? It may not be, as Richard mentions, I mean, a style cannot be entitled to exclusive rights, but it raises really interesting issues on the intellectual property front. And then also, one other risk that I neglected to mention is to the access point. We have now just put into the hands of everybody the ability to create at low cost, extremely accurate deep fakes and disinformation. So whereas before you had to work at it to create it, and it was still a problem, I think for our society and also for our corporations, that is a problem, because you could imagine that bad actors could, for example, create a deep fake of the CEO and make inappropriate comments that affect the brand. And so that's something that, and also as a society and as a democracy, our ability to survive depends upon being able to distinguish between truth and false. So there are a bunch of boardroom issues there, but that is a risk as a board member that we need to be prepared for, much like cybersecurity risk or anything else. This is already going to come, right? You know it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I would add to that, having been a CISO as well as a CIO, every CEO is spoofed. And I can't tell you how many treasurers get requests, bogus fake requests from their CEO to wire money. Every day it happens. To Michelle's point, it's not just email now. It's, you can actually create a video and it'll look like your CEO. It'll sound like your CEO if they have his voice, which is very easy to gather. They can create a deep fake that would be undistinguishable, quite frankly. to most folks. So that therein lies a nuance here where things have changed a little bit. If you've seen the TikTok videos, there's one gentleman that does Tom Cruise, which is pretty amusing. You can't distinguish that from the real Tom Cruise. It's uncanny, quite frankly. So we're there, and it's a real risk. I think, to Michelle's point, people's voices being recorded now to then be reused by bad actors. It's something that you need to be aware of, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously one step of this for everyone is just awareness and being aware of these risks. And I see some great resources being placed into the chat. So thank you for everyone for doing that. So keep them coming. Speaking of bad actors, on my drive home the other night, even the movie industry I was hearing is being impacted by this in terms of generative AI and the risk to the industry. So let's talk a little bit about that. In terms of professional roles, what do we think in terms of this technology being able to replace as many predict roles across industries? Who do we think will be most impacted? Michelle, maybe we'll start with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, creative workers, artists, developers, writers. I mean, what function will not be disrupted is, I think, really the question. Um, uh, People who create content, people who summarize content, people who synthesize content. We live in an information age, so I think many aspects of our workforce will be affected. And I guess the question in the boardroom is, that being the case, what are the values of the corporation as it adopts this technology, which it needs to for competitive advantage, to remain competitive? What are they going to do in terms of retraining its existing workforce? What obligations does it have consistent with the values of the company and consistent with the good of our society? So, I could go on and on, but I think many of our audience members are sophisticated enough to know, like the teachers, advisors, financial advisors, writers, coders, really even drug researchers. The list goes on.
Mhm. Yeah. Richard, anything you want to
So
add on this?
yeah, I have a very strong view on this subject. So there's a lot of media hype right now around the financial impact and on certain roles. I think most folks, artists, musicians, the creatives, were probably the last role that folks thought might be impacted by AI in this manner, but they're the first. In my observations, and I'm still very much involved in the art world and music, there are artists that are embracing this technology as a new tool. And there are now AI artists, and they're doing quite well. They're in MoMA and many other places. So I think there will be those roles that use AI and those that don't. So this is about augmentation of existing talent and resources. The fact of the matter is, customer service roles, I think, will be significantly impacted, because now, we all get the bots when we're on the mobile app for our favorite phone company, or trying to get service. These bots are not very good, right? They're usually automated. They're automated, and that's going to be significantly impacted. I think any opportunity that organizations have an interface to their customer in a B2B or B2C scenario, I think this generative AI, specifically chat bots and chat GPT, can enhance that significantly. But I think a lot of roles will be augmented by this technology for better. And there will be lawyers and doctors and accountants and other experts that use it, and those that don't. And as a consumer, I want to work with those that do. So that's kind of my take on it. However, again, the media is jumping all over this, the impact of this. I'm not going to make a dystopian opinion that it's going to replace a certain percentage of roles, but there will be impact. But I think net, there'll be net new jobs created in AI. People that know this technology, that can help organizations embrace it and leverage it. So I think the impact from a labor perspective may be a little bit overblown right now, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
But it's real.
Yeah, I think what you'll see is a lot of the more mundane, routine, clerical tasks that many of our companies outsourced to other countries like India. I think you're going to see a pulling back on that. And you'll be able to leverage the productivity of your employees, so you don't need as many employees performing a task. You get a smaller number. So that, I think, at the end, inures to the benefit of the customer.
Yeah. And so I'd love to hear both of your perspectives. Richard, maybe we'll start with you. Do we think this is still just like a hype cycle bubble or beginning of the next industrial revolution along with other emerging tech? Any perspectives on that from either of you? Maybe Richard?
Yeah. So 2 roles ago, I was a 5G evangelist at Verizon, and I was out there touting that the 5G specifically was going to be stored in the next industrial revolution. AI may very well be it. I think it's a confluence of various technologies, 5G and 6G from a connectivity perspective, coupled with AI, coupled with smart cameras. Bring in quantum is very much a real thing right now and coming. I think it's again a collective of various technologies that will steward in this industrial revolution that will change work and life as we know it. But I think AI is a significant component to that. As I think Michelle mentioned, like we'll be able to do more with less for sure, because everyone from administrators all the way up to executives can now leverage this technology. I don't know about you all, but I've been using it daily for various things. When you're approaching a PowerPoint presentation for a talk or a strategy, perhaps, it's that writer's block thing that just gets blown out of the water right now. There's no more writer's block. You type in what you want to create, and what you get, then you can then just take and then make it your own and embellish on it. I think that's also been impacted. So again, as an optimist, I think this technology will augment existing roles and provide companies with an additional layer of competitive advantage and revenue opportunity. And most importantly, customer experience will be enhanced in a great way.
Thanks for sharing that. Michelle, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think not going to replace humans anytime soon, but I don't think this is hype. This is real. AI has been now over the most recent, I would say, past several years, due to the increased power of computing, due to the cheapness of storage, due to the innovations in AI algorithms, and also due to cloud computing. The confluence of those factors have made this technology ripe, and I think you're going to see the implications for years and decades to come. I think the more interesting question that you did not ask is, should we have a moratorium for 6 months on the development of generative AI? But I'm going to put that aside for a moment. And if okay, Sam, what I would like to share with the audience member are some, very practical advice and takeaways as they're sitting in the boardroom, questions they might ask, topics they might address. If we could go there, that would be helpful, I think, to the audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
That'd be great.
So as I had mentioned at the start of the program, in all of my board meetings since the announcement of ChatGPT in November, every one of my board meetings has had AI and AI strategy on its agenda. So clearly, companies now need to have an AI strategy. And if they don't have one, they need to undertake to develop one. And if they don't have the expertise or talent, they need to bring that in or get the advisors, because this technology has implications on every industry, every vertical, every department within a company. So that's number one. Number two is, as a board member, I would be asking if the company has a policy on the use of generative AI, where can and can it not be used, based upon the discussions we had about intellectual property and the creation of content, and the value of it to the company and the importance of having exclusivity. Also, I would be encouraging our companies to experiment with generative AI, have in-house teams exploring potential applications in their industry, for their business, in safe sandboxes with inputs from legal, the technology folks, and the risk and compliance folks. It's an interdisciplinary effort that has to oversee these initiatives. Also, as a board member, I would be asking if they're having appropriate human-in-the-loop review of the outputs of generative AI. If you think back, when elevators were first put into buildings, they had the elevator operator who would push the button to make sure that everybody got to whatever floor they needed safely. And having a person in the loop for generative AI or AI to start to make sure that the output is accurate and appropriate is, I think, a good step. Over time, that may fall by the wayside, just as the elevator operator did, but I think you'll need to preserve the brand and to ensure accuracy, that kind of oversight. And also put in place or make sure that your data privacy, cybersecurity initiatives are all up to par with where you want it to be. And importantly, make sure that the companies that you're serving on the boards of are implementing specific processes and procedures to ensure that the AI systems are fair, responsible, and trustworthy. And that goes all the way throughout the design process of the AI system, the sourcing of the data to make sure that you're getting bias free or minimizing the bias in the data, because biased data leads to biased models. And also during the building, testing, and deployment of these models, and even after launch when they're operating, because these models, because they're trained on data, which is oftentimes updated, can drift and their accuracy can degrade over time. So just make sure that all the processes and procedures are in place and that the employees that are working for the company feel enabled to pull the and-on cord, which was that cord that Toyota had in their manufacturing line, that any employee was empowered to say, hey, look, the product that's going out the door is not appropriate, so we're going to stop it and make sure that it is right. And that has implications on the company, the brand, impact on the customers, and impact on society. So those are just a few points that I would raise or share to fellow board members as they're sitting in the boardroom.
Those are fantastic. Thank you for sharing those. It sounds there's a lot of parallels with respect to what we're seeing right now with respect to ESG, environmental, social governance, and DEI in terms of the breadth. I'm sort of curious, do you see any parallels or similarities with generative AI, ESG, and any DEI implications either of you would want to share?
Yes, tremendous. I think AI in general, right, has been battling with bias within it.
Mm.
The fact of the matter is these models are created by a certain specific demo out on the West Coast in most cases, by a certain type of individual. And I've had these discussions with some of the founders of the large AI companies that would like to democratize this technology, not only by access, but also by the content itself. If you type in doctor, or something to create an image, in most cases, that doctor will look like a certain demographic, depending on the folks who built the AI modeling. So ensuring you've got diversity and inclusion in your models has always been an issue, I believe, for organizations developing AI models on their own. There's a great opportunity there to also ensure ethical considerations, to provide fairness and accountability and transparency to the models, so that everyone feels inclusive with the results at the end of the day, especially on the imaging front, as well as videos, and probably copy and context, and the copy being created as well, right? You can use these tools to create marketing copy for your website, for instance. And I think bias within AI is not a new topic, and generative AI exasperates the need for it, for sure.
Great.
Michelle has an equally strong opinion on this one.
Yeah.
Not much to add beyond that which Richard said, but I also think that AI technology has the opportunity to help with the environmental, to help with the DEI. So it poses risks, but the power of this tool is such that it can help us solve some of our toughest problems. I would add that two other points that I neglected to mention in terms of recommendations to the fellow board members is I would also ask what legislative policies, pending or enacted, implicate your company's intended use of AI. So for example, the European Union's AI Act, which is pending, prohibits certain applications of AI, for example, social scoring, and it requires pre-regulatory approval before other applications of AI can enter the European market. So most of us serve on boards where our employees and our customers are beyond the borders of the United States. So depending upon the industry that you're in, if you're in the healthcare industry, if you're in the financial services industry, the EU's AI Act is potentially highly relevant to your company's AI efforts. So I would be asking that question: what policies and regulations implicate our plans, our AI strategy? And then secondly, I would also, just as when we're in the boardroom, we do tabletop exercises for cybersecurity risks and breaches, I would use that infrastructure and encourage the company to use that infrastructure to address what happens if there's a deep fake or disinformation about the company or a deep fake of our CEO. And I would be asking the company if they're monitoring our brand as it's perceived online.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, those are great call-outs. There's a question also in the chat, Michelle. You talked a little bit earlier about the 6-month pause on AI development. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes. So I'm glad to elaborate on it. You'll probably ask me next what my opinion is on it, and I'm still noodling that one. But basically, as I think many of you know and read, some very distinguished individuals, including Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak, and a number of AI researchers, um, have an open letter, and they've signed it saying that, look, this technology is so powerful, it has such broad implications. We should have a 6-month moratorium on work on AI systems that can compete with human intelligence. And in their letter, they ask, rightly or wrongly, should we let machines flood our information channels with propaganda and untruth? Should we automate jobs away, including fulfilling ones? And so these are not my words. These are points within the letter. Should we develop non-human minds that might eventually outnumber or outsmart or obsolete or replace us? And they even ask, should we risk the loss of control of our civilization? So fascinating letter, and signed by a number of very distinguished individuals, but also a very controversial topic.
Wow. Yeah. Crazy. One more question here. Any insights on human capital impact due to AI? Quite a topic that most technical talent is really concerned about. So we did talk a little bit about that, but anything else we want to add there?
I think we touched on it earlier.
Yeah.
The workforce impact of this technology on certain roles, or I think existing roles will be able to do more, quite frankly, with this technology in their hands. So net, I think organizations will have a certain percentage of scale down as a result of this technology. But I think net overall, there will be net new roles created as a result of this technology, more data scientists, more data modelers, more folks who understand this technology, who can implement it in organizations. So I've seen everything from 10% to 40%. I think IBM most recently, or some large tech company, just put a halt on all new hiring as a result of this. So the media is jumping on this for sure, but I don't think we're into this deep enough to understand what this potential impact is on the workforce just yet. I think organizations need to ensure their existing workforce is upskilled from a change management perspective, to ensure that folks are using these tools internally so they can explore opportunities for competitive advantage. And I think every role could potentially be enhanced and augmented with this technology to help organizations at all levels. I think Satya, the chairman and CEO of Microsoft, had a talk with the Wall Street Journal journalist regarding this topic, and he eloquently put various roles within any organization to how they could be positively impacted with this technology in their hands, with, of course, the guide rails we've been discussing today.
See a few more questions.
One last point on the pause before we move on from that subject.
Sure.
As Michelle mentioned, there were many great minds like Elon and Wozniak. Emad Mustak, the founder of Stability, actually signed it. Probably, I think, thousands. Or I think there's pros and cons to that. I think jokingly, Elon, I've heard Elon wanted to pause so he can catch up because he just made a large purchase last month of a large amount of GPU technology. I suspect Twitter or his parent company will be going after this and building their own AI models real soon. There's also been discussions from a public sector perspective on, if we pause and just the US pauses, then that gives all these other countries the opportunity to get ahead of us as well. This is a very competitive issue, as is quantum with China and many other countries. So I think folks like Peter Zeihan, who's a great speaker, has an interesting viewpoint on these subjects of the impact of chip semiconductor manufacturing and AI and GPUs and infrastructure relative to supply chain and other things. There's geopolitical aspects of this that need to be explored as well. But I just wanted to add that on the profitability ones. I think this healthcare, wellness, neurodiversity can all be very positively impacted by everything, not just Gen AI, but metaverse. Even there's been studies now that the metaverse and VR has direct physiological impact on us, not just mental health and wellness, but also physical changes. There's a couple of folks like Srini Pillai and some others from Harvard doing research around this subject. So to that point, I think there's lots of tech for good opportunities here as well, not just about competitive advantage and getting predictive analytics so that you can sell more, which is fine and fair. But I think there's lots of health and wellness opportunities where this technology can support.
Yeah, and just to add to what Richard said, as board members, we are in a unique position where in our companies and in their industries and for the AI applications that they're choosing, we have the opportunity to help the company guide its AI efforts to societal good, or also stop AI efforts that we think will not be advantageous to society. And if not advantageous to society, question whether it is really advantageous to our customer and the bottom line. So you really do have a unique opportunity to be the overseer of these efforts. And it's not just the regulators, the policymakers, or the technologists, it's the board members who can play a role and should play a role, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that gets back to the ESG and or DEI topic, Sam, for sure. Every organization, Fortune 1000 I'm aware of, have very significant programs in place, whether it's E, S, and or G, as well as DEI, to ensure that their products, their services, their internal employee experience, their external customer experience is all conforming to some level of equality and transparency in their standards. So I think this one specifically, Gen AI, has that opportunity even greater now because of the fact that it's creating all kinds of content. Again, not just images, but copy and text and video and music. So I think there's a great connection here with this technology, with any organization's DEI and ESG efforts, which tend to be topics that boards are discussing for sure as well, to Michelle's point.
Yeah. And the risk is not evaluating the opportunities fully, not providing that common sense, right? We all live in the world and society. We have common sense about how we think this technology could or should be used. But our corporations, our companies, exploring all the opportunities for efficiency and the ability to drive revenue weighed against the societal. And I think there's an opportunity cost. If you're not looking into these, I mean, that's a strategic operational risk, right? So both weighing the risks and the opportunities, it's a risk to do nothing. It's to have somebody come in to look at it, to have your team look at it, to present it to the board, to present the options, to evaluate, and then deciding where is the appropriate place to lean in for your company, for your industry, for the particular stage of your company, and then leaning in as appropriate.
Yeah,
I think that's right. I think from an emerging technology perspective, Sam, boards are getting hit with the public media around metaverse. Web3 had its day for a while. Things have waned on those two for now. Gen AI is at the top right now. I suspect quantum's right behind Gen AI, quite frankly. For sure, these are hype cycles, but this one feels different. I think Michelle mentioned it. AI is not new, so and a certain select few have had access to the technology. It's been consumerized and made culture, if you will, and the ramifications of that, the expectations of consumers and patients on their service providers has changed. And I think millennials, which represent 30 trillion in revenue by 2030, they will expect their brands, their doctors, their lawyers, their accountants to be savvy in this technology and to meet them where they are, because they're going to be living in it. They're going to be using AI tools. They're native to it, not just native internet or native digital. They're going to be native metaverse. They're going to be native Web3, and they're going to be native at Gen AI, quite frankly. So their expectations of services being provided to them and the brands they want to associate with had better be up to speed and using these tools as well to meet them where they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know it's definitely impacting the accounting profession. We're seeing it every day. It's on our radar. There's another question here, Michelle. You talked a lot about sort of having your legal background. Is there likely to be a regulatory or technological push to increase source transparency and attribution of outputs of Gen AI? I don't know
Oh,
if you
that's such a good question. And it's something that I have thought about because, of course, I care about intellectual property rights and, making sure that we continue to incentivize the creators of intellectual property. And I do think that there will be a push to increase the transparency of how these models are trained, where they're coming from, and attribution. And I also think that, there's discussion about the requirement of the use of watermarks for certain kinds of visual images so that you can trace origin. And you're going to see these types of solutions being proposed, but the data is not free. It is not unanchored to the creators of that. And that is precisely the area where regulators are focused, which is tracing the lineage of works that are created. And that way you can also, when you're tracing lineage, you have the opportunity to hopefully get some sense of the truthfulness or the sources of that particular recommendation or that particular output. Did a medical recommendation come from the Mayo Clinic database of data? And so all those issues, I think, are going to be very critical to the ongoing development and embracing of this technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Richard,
mean, there were I think U.S. Senate committee hearings commenced last week. I was in San regarding AI. I know Sam from OpenAI, Satya got called in. Emad's going in soon. I mean, all of the AI leaders from these organizations are getting pulled in for these hearings. So the government is all over this, I think, from a regulatory perspective, as they should be, to ensure that I think regulatory and standards will be developed since they're not.
Yeah, and there's a great comment too on the chat line about the use of this technology, generative AI, in education. And at first, the teachers were, of course, rightly concerned about the generation of essays and contents, not by the students, but by these chatbots. But I too believe that there are so many positive applications of generative AI in the educational sector. I mean, who wouldn't want, in essence, hopefully a personal tutor that goes at my speed, that addresses my weaknesses, that tests me more deeply in areas that I need more practice in? I mean, if we could really provide a truly effective individual tutor to every one of us at whatever stage, at whatever age, think of what the human potential we could develop as a result. So this goes to the, what good could result. I see a lot of good in the area of education.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The application within performance development and giving candid feedback within an organization, which a lot of times we're not always the best at doing. So it's a great idea. Richard, sorry.
I'm sorry. Two more questions came in. One is GDPR and CCPA compliance, and how that how those regulations treat private information in Gen AI. I think it's the same. Gen AI is just creating more data. If it's got, if it has PII or it has client information in it, all the data generated or embedded within Gen AI outputs are under the same guidelines and regulatory obligations. So it's just more data. It's not, Gen AI doesn't make it any different than the existing data standards. Another question, I know we're not talking about Web3 here, is blockchain finally going to have a commercial role to play in source tracing? I'm not sure, Michelle, if you want to take that one, or.
I think it could very well. I think that's a wonderful.
Yeah. I think the public sector is finally embracing blockchain and Web3. Blockchain's been around like AI for many decades, early 90s, actually. And I think the state of California most recently pulled the trigger on DMV records. And even more recently, California's now, other agencies are going to start using blockchain technology to track other things as far as individual residents of the state. Unfortunately, blockchain gets a bad rap because of the association with cryptocurrency. you can have blockchain without crypto. Blockchain's a very viable technology for various use cases. So hopefully that answers that one for George. Great question.
Really good question. Just generally, in terms of non-experts in the audience that are trying to get up to speed, what would you suggest to the lay person to stay abreast of some of these changes? What do you both use to stay on top of this? I'm just curious if there's anything you want to share in terms of resources, books, websites, articles.
Yeah. So I think for the board members, right? It's not so critical to stay on top of the technological advances in Python, but what I have found helpful is taking, and what I offered when I was leading the Machine Learning Solutions Lab in my prior company, we offered business leader training on AI applications. So, I mean, for the executives within your corporation and for the board members, right? What are the applications of AI? What are other industries and what are other companies doing now and today, right? And therefore, if you understand that, then you can think for your industry, for your company, for your business, what might the applications be? So I would focus towards, learning more about the business applications. And of course, you can keep on top of the latest developments technologically, because that enables and expands the potential business applications. But really, for your business executives within your companies, do they understand when you're looking at the executives and when you're looking around in the boardroom, do the people you're working with truly understand the implications, the business implications of this technology? And if not, bring people in who do, who can educate them on it. And it's going to change. It's evolving so quickly. But I think that's the most critical piece, because if your executives know what can be done, if they can view the data within their corporation as an asset, and then they can then gain insights on what they might use that data for on the AI side, then they will be identifying opportunities along the way, and everybody will be contributing to help identify what's most impactful for your company.
I think there's no shortage. Every media outlet, every other subject. Even last week, I was traveling, watching local news media outlets. Every media outlet has AI as the top of mind, whether it's financial Bloomberg or CNBC, all the way down to local broadcasting. There's 60 Minutes. This is top of mind. It's now culture. I think boards need to be abreast of the risks and opportunities of this technology. There are, and as Michelle mentioned, you don't need to get into the technology, the languages that are being used. You need to understand the risks it represents to the organization from a data protection and privacy perspective. You need to understand what it means to DEI and ESG opportunities. And last but not least, I think what it means to employees also, and their ability to put tools in employees' hands. This workforce impact issue needs to be monitored carefully at every sector to ensure that that things are managed. As far as resources, again, every top media outlet has articles. There's a couple of newsletters I get daily to just stay. It's the pace and trajectory of new startups in this space. The VC investments going in is unprecedented in my observations. But there's certainly no shortage of things. I'm going to share a few links. We're going to put a package together, I believe, for our attendees on various things. There's a couple of videos I'm going to suggest. One by Eric Schmidt, who speaks at an MIT summit, which I found riveting. Well worth the time to watch and hear Eric's perspective on this subject. And there's another one that Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, speaking to Wall Street Journal. I think those two videos are well worth the time to watch at all levels, not too technical, more business impact. That would be highly recommended for the audience. And I'll share those as well.
Thanks so much, Richard. Well, thank you both, Michelle and Richard, for spending the last hour with us, and to NACD for putting on this program. I'm sure this is just the first of many more of these sessions to come on this topic. And to everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for joining. We'll be in touch soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.